Some stories begin with once upon a time, but Odette had never believed in fairy tales, which made it rather ironic that she was about to save a disguised king and earn his love forever. They say the smallest act of kindness can change a kingdom. As it turned out, Odette's kindness would change the king himself, melting his warrior's heart and opening it to love. It begins on snow that fell thick and fast as Odette trudged up the winding road toward the Alpha King's castle. The package from the village weighed heavy in her arms, expensive spices the head chef had sent her to fetch, convinced their ruler would return any day now and demand a feast worthy of his homecoming. For the winter festival, the cook had said, eyes bright with hope, he'll be back for the celebrations, mark my words. Odette doubted it. The war had ended only 2 months ago. Even if King Rhovan had left the front immediately, the journey from the front took time. More likely, he was still securing the borders, ensuring the enemy truly was defeated. The wind picked up, sharp enough to steal her breath. The blizzard the village elders had warned about was coming faster than expected. If she didn't reach the castle soon, she'd be caught in the worst of it. But a sound cut through the howling wind, low, pained, wrong. Odette stopped, listening. There it was again. A whimper, almost lost beneath the storm. Setting the package down, Odette pushed through the snow toward the sound. 20 paces off the road, she found him. A massive silver wolf lay crumpled in a ditch, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. Even half buried in snow, she could see the size of him, easily twice as large as any natural wolf. A shifter, then. Had to be. Most of them had gone to fight alongside the king, using their animal forms to turn the tide of battle. "Oh no," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "Can you hear me?" The wolf's eyes cracked open, pale gray, glazed with pain. His breathing came shallow and labored. Blood matted the silver fur along his side, but it was the wound on his shoulder that made her stomach clench. The flesh around it had turned black, spreading like ink in water. Poison. The enemy's signature, weapons coated in venom that prevented shifter healing. This soldier had traveled who knows how far, making for home, only to collapse within sight of the castle. How long had he been lying here? Odette looked up at the sky. The snow was falling faster now, the wind screaming. In another hour, maybe less, the blizzard would hit full force. Anyone caught outside would freeze to death, even a shifter. She looked back at the wolf, at those dimming gray eyes. He had spent 6 years defending her kingdom, had fought so she could live safely within these walls, had sacrificed everything while she'd gone about her comfortable life as a palace maid. And she was going to leave him here to die? Absolutely not, Odette muttered. She left the spices where they lay and bent over the wolf. He was huge, had to weigh at least what she did, maybe more. But 6 years of hauling laundry, scrubbing floors, and carrying supplies up and down castle stairs had made her stronger than she looked. Bracing her legs, she worked her arms beneath him and lifted. The wolf whimpered. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm so sorry, but we have to move." She got him across her shoulders, his weight pressing down like an avalanche. Her knees nearly buckled. The castle loomed on the hill above, impossibly far. One step, then another. The wind tore at her cloak, sent snow stinging into her face. Her legs screamed, her shoulders burned. The wolf was dead weight against her back, his warm blood soaking through her dress. "I can't do this," she thought as she stumbled, nearly went down. "It's too far." But the wolf had made it so much farther, had crossed an entire kingdom, wounded and poisoned, trying to get home. Had spent 6 years facing horrors she couldn't imagine, all to keep people like her safe. She owed him this. They all did. Odette gritted her teeth and kept walking. Chapter 1. Odette burst through the servants' entrance, dripping snow and mud across the pristine stone floors. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her hair plastered to her face, blood, not hers, staining her dress. "Odette," Madame Bure's voice could have frozen fire. "How kind of you to join us. 2 hours late." The kitchen staff froze. Every eye turned toward her. The headmaid was tall and severe, her iron-gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. "Madame Bure, I'm so sorry." Odette's legs shook. "I found a wounded shifter on the road, poisoned, and I'm sorry, but how is that more important than the head chef's explicit instructions?" Bure asked, thin lips curved. "He would have died," Odette's voice cracked. "The healer said so himself. Surely that takes priority over—" "Silence! Nobody asked for your opinion on what our soldiers do or don't deserve, girl," Bure snapped. "You have a job. You do it. Know your place or you won't keep your next job." The kitchen fell silent while the unfairness of it burned in Odette's chest. Madame Bure didn't care. The guards hadn't helped either. No one cared about the soldiers who'd bled for them, not unless it was convenient. "These shifters fought for us," Odette said quietly. "They deserve better than—" "You're dismissed, effective immediately." Bure gestured sharply toward the door. "What?" Odette gasped. "You hear me?" Bure said. "Get out. I want you gone within the hour." Odette looked wildly toward Liv and Rosie near the washing tubs. They looked horrified, but didn't dare speak. "But the storm," she protested. "It's getting worse. Can't I wait until—" "You should have thought of that before playing hero." Bure's expression was ice. "Now get out." Odette's throat burned. 6 years she'd worked here. 6 years, and this was how it ended. She made it to her tiny room before the tears came. Everything she owned fit into a single bag, a spare dress, her mother's comb, a few coins. 6 years, and this was all she had. A soft knock. Liv slipped through the door, her round face creased with worry. That was cruel, even for Bure. She was within her rights. I was late. "You saved a soldier's life." "Bure doesn't care about that." Odette shoved her dress into her bag. "The guards didn't either. They wouldn't even help me carry him, Liv. Just stood there and watched me struggle." Liv's expression flickered, sympathy mixed with something harder. "I know it's not right, but Odette, you have to look out for yourself. Times are hard. Where are you going to go? How will you survive the storm?" "So I should have left him to die?" "The shifter might not live anyway." Liv's voice was gentle but firm. "And what good does it do if you starve or freeze to death? Helping others is what makes this world worth living in." Odette's hands shook as she tied her bag closed. "If we all just look out for ourselves, what's the point of any of it?" Liv was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Listen, you can't go out in this storm. Hide with healer Chiron until it passes. He won't turn you away." She pressed a bundle into Odette's hands. "Bread and cheese. Just pray Bure doesn't come looking, or she'll have you thrown in the dungeons for trespassing." Odette hugged her fiercely. "Thank you." "Just stay alive," Liv whispered, "and stay away from Jadis. That one's Bure's spy." 10 minutes later, Odette slipped through the side door and into the storm. The wind had picked up, turning the snow into horizontal needles. She pulled her cloak tight and hurried toward the warm glow of Chiron's cottage. The healer opened the door before she could knock. "I wondered if you'd end up back here. Come in, child, before you freeze." The cottage's warmth enveloped her like an embrace. Odette sagged with relief, then immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry to impose. Madame Bure fired me, and I have nowhere else to go until the storm passes." "Fired you for saving a life?" Chiron shook his head. "That woman has a heart of stone. You're welcome here as long as you need." "How is he?" Odette looked toward the examination table where the silver wolf lay, still unconscious. "Stable. The poison is working its way out slowly, but he'll live." Chiron moved toward his herb shelves with practiced ease. "Actually, I could use your help. These old hands aren't as steady as they used to be, and that shoulder wound needs cleaning properly before I can stitch it." Of course. Odette set her bag down and moved to the wash basin, scrubbing her hands clean. Tell me what you need. Chiron guided her through preparing a salve, mint for cooling, comfrey for healing, golden seal to draw out poison. The familiar work settled her nerves. At least here she could be useful. The wolf's breathing was deeper now, more regular. Odette knelt beside the table and carefully parted the blood-matted fur around his shoulder wound. The blackness had receded slightly, which Chiron said was a good sign. I'm going to clean this now, she murmured to the unconscious wolf, the way Chiron had taught her. It might sting. I'm sorry. She worked slowly, carefully, cleaning away the dried blood and debris. The wound was deep, but no longer seemed to be spreading. As she reached for fresh bandages, the wolf's body suddenly tensed. She worked slowly, carefully cleaning the wound. The wolf's breathing had grown steadier, deeper. A good sign, Chiron had said. I'm going to the cellar for supplies, the healer said behind her. Won't be but a moment. The back door clicked shut. Odette was alone with the wolf. She dipped her cloth in the water basin, wringing it out. Her hands were steadier now, the familiar rhythm of tending wounds calming her frayed nerves. At least here she could be useful. At least. The wolf's body went rigid beneath her touch. Odette froze. Easy, she whispered. You're safe. You're... Light bloomed beneath his silver fur. Not firelight, not lantern glow, something else entirely, pale and shimmering like moonlight made liquid. It rippled across his body in waves, and the fur began to recede. Odette stumbled backward, her hip hitting the table edge. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What was happening? The light grew brighter, forcing her to squint. The wolf's form seemed to blur, to shift and flow like water, bones reshaping, limbs lengthening. The sound of it wasn't violent. No cracking, no tearing, just a soft whisper like wind through leaves. Then the light faded. And where the wolf had been, a man lay unconscious on the table. Odette's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. A naked man. Her first instinct was to look away, to avert her eyes like a proper maiden should. But she couldn't. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. She'd heard stories of shifters, of course. Everyone had. But she'd never seen the transformation, never imagined it would be like this, like witnessing something sacred and terrible and beautiful all at once. Her pulse thundered in her ears. He was huge. That was her first coherent thought. Tall and broad and powerfully built in a way that made the examination table seem too small. His skin was bronze, covered in scars, so many scars. They crisscrossed his chest, his arms, his abdomen like a map of violence, like a history written in pain. A warrior, a soldier, someone who'd seen horrors she couldn't imagine. Her gaze traveled upward almost against her will. His face was all sharp angles, strong jaw, high cheekbones, a blade of a nose. Dark hair fell across his forehead, slightly damp with fever sweat. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, stark white against his skin. Even unconscious, even battered and poisoned, he was... Beautiful wasn't the right word. Beautiful was too soft, too gentle. He was something fiercer than that. Something that made her stomach drop and her breath catch and her skin feel too tight. Dangerous, that was the word. He looked dangerous. She should cover him. Should grab the blanket and preserve his modesty and her own. Should stop staring like some foolish girl who'd never seen a man before. Because she hadn't, not like this, not this close, not... Heat flooded her face as she realized where her eyes had drifted. She jerked her gaze back to his face, her cheeks burning. Her hands trembled as she finally moved, reaching for the blanket on the chair. But even as she draped it over his lower body, her eyes kept returning to him. To the broad span of his shoulders, the muscled planes of his chest rising and falling with each breath, the way his throat worked as he swallowed unconsciously, the curve of his lips slightly parted. Something twisted low in her belly, unfamiliar and frightening and thrilling all at once. She'd carried him through a blizzard, saved his life, and now he was here, transformed into this man who made her heart race and her thoughts scatter like startled birds. Who was he? The question whispered through her mind as she stood there, unable to look away. Chapter 2. The storm raged for 3 days. Odette barely left his side. There was nowhere else to go, but even if there had been, she wasn't sure she could have torn herself away. Something about him drew her, this mysterious soldier who'd appeared in her life like something out of legend. Chiron's hands trembled too much for the delicate task of cleaning wounds, so Odette tended to him. She learned the landscape of his body, every scar, every ridge of muscle, every place where old injuries had healed poorly, the wicked slash across his ribs, the puckered mark on his shoulder that looked like a bite. Fever burned through him in waves. She kept cool cloths on his forehead, his chest, anywhere the heat concentrated. Her hands moved over his skin countless times, checking for fever, cleaning wounds, applying salves, professional touches, medicinal. She tried not to stare at the rise and fall of his chest, at the way his muscles shifted beneath bronze skin when he moved restlessly in sleep. Tried and failed. It helps to talk to them, Chiron had said, gives them something to hold on to. So Odette talked. She told him about her childhood, about losing her parents when she was 10, about coming to the castle desperate and half-starved, about 6 years of invisible servitude. "The kingdom waited so long for you soldiers to come home," she said softly, wringing out a cloth over the basin. "All of you. 6 years is a lifetime." She smoothed the cool cloth across his forehead, her fingers brushing back the dark hair that fell over his eyes. His hair was softer than she'd expected, thick and slightly wavy. He stirred beneath her touch, a small furrow appearing between his brows. His breathing quickened, becoming labored. "Shh," Odette murmured, her hand moving to his shoulder, gentle but firm. "You're safe. You're healing." The tension in his body eased slightly at her voice. "We heard stories about the battles," she continued, keeping her tone soft and steady. "About how the shifters turned the tide. About how brave you all were." Her hand remained on his shoulder, a grounding touch. "You're a hero. You protected us when we couldn't protect ourselves." His chest rose and fell, deep and labored. But as she spoke, his breathing began to slow, to even out. "Thank you," she whispered, smoothing the cloth across his forehead again. "Thank you for everything you sacrificed, for the years you gave, for coming home." Something shifted in his face, the harsh lines softening, his lips parting slightly. Almost like a smile, though his eyes never opened. He relaxed under her hands, sinking deeper into sleep. Odette's throat tightened. Even delirious with fever, he'd heard her, responded to her gratitude. She let her hand linger on his shoulder a moment longer before returning to her work. The second night was worse. The fever spiked again, and he became restless, thrashing weakly, muttering words she couldn't understand. His face twisted with pain or memories, she couldn't tell which. "No," he mumbled, his head turning side to side. "Can't, have to." "You're safe," Odette said, pressing a cool cloth to his chest. His skin was burning. "The war is over. You're home." But he didn't hear her. His hand shot out, grabbing at nothing, and a sound escaped him. Something between a gasp and a groan. Without thinking, Odette caught his hand in hers. His fingers closed around hers immediately, too tight, almost painful. His grip was desperate, like she was the only solid thing in a world of fever dreams. "I'm here," she said softly, her other hand moving to his face, cupping his jaw. His stubble was rough against her palm. "You're not alone. I'm right here." His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving. She kept talking, her voice low and soothing. Told him about the snow outside, about how peaceful the cottage was, about how the poison was leaving his body, and soon he'd be strong again. Slowly, so slowly, his breathing calmed. His grip on her hand loosened, though he didn't let go. "That's it," she whispered. "Just rest. I'm not going anywhere." His thumb moved against her palm, just once, barely conscious. But it was there. Odette stayed like that for hours, her hand in his, her other hand stroking his hair back from his fevered forehead, murmuring reassurances whenever he grew restless, anchoring him. By the time dawn broke, her back ached and her arm was numb, but he was sleeping peacefully, his hand still loosely holding hers. She didn't pull away. The third day, he surfaced briefly. Odette was changing his bandages when his eyes fluttered open, unfocused, glazed with fever, but open. "Where?" His voice was barely a rasp. "Healer's cottage, you're safe." She kept her movements slow and gentle. "You were poisoned, do you remember?" His brow furrowed like he was trying to pull thoughts through thick fog. You saved me?" "Don't try to talk," she scolded gently. "You need to save your strength." His eyes found hers, struggling to focus. Then his hand moved, trembling and weak, reaching for her. Odette caught it without thinking, pressing it between both of hers. "I'm here," she said. "You're going to be all right." His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear. His eyes were already closing again. But just before he slipped back under, his fingers squeezed hers, so faint she almost missed it. A thank you, she thought. Or maybe just acknowledgement that she was real, that this wasn't another fever dream. She held his hand until his breathing evened out. By the fourth morning, everything changed. Odette woke slumped in her chair beside him, her neck stiff from the awkward angle. Pale sunlight streamed through the windows, the first real sunlight in days. The storm had broken. She sat up quickly, checking him by instinct. Her hand went to his forehead. Cool. His skin was cool. Relief flooded through her so strongly it made her dizzy. She pressed her hand to his chest. His heartbeat was strong and steady, his breathing deep and even. The fever was gone, the poison had finally worked its way out. He would live. Odette sagged back in her chair, suddenly exhausted. 3 days of constant vigilance, of watching him fight for every breath, and it was over. He was going to be all right. She let herself look at him properly, not checking for fever or injuries, just looking. At the strong lines of his face, peaceful now in true sleep. At the rise and fall of his chest, at his hands, relaxed against the blanket. Beautiful, mysterious. And soon he would wake, would be strong enough to leave. The thought settled in her chest like a stone. Outside, the world sparkled with fresh snow and sunlight. The storm had passed. But Odette stayed where she was, watching over the stranger who'd somehow become precious to her in just 3 days. This soldier whose name she still didn't know. Chapter 3. Odette woke to the feeling of being watched. She'd fallen asleep, slumped in the chair, and her back protested. But none of that mattered when she lifted her head and found his gray eyes clear and alert. "You're awake," she exclaimed. "I am," he said, his voice still rough. "Who are you?" "Odette," she replied. "I'm the one who found you 4 days ago on the road to the castle. You were wounded. I brought you to the healer." He studied her for a long moment, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "You didn't have to do that," he observed carefully. "Of course I did," Odette protested. "You're a soldier. You spent 6 years fighting to protect this kingdom. You and all the other shifters who followed our king to war. The least we can do is help now." He stared some more with something like wonder. "Thank you," he said quietly. She was suddenly acutely aware that he was still shirtless, that the blanket had slipped down to his waist, that she could see every ridge of muscle, every scar, the steady rise and fall of his chest. "You must be hungry," she managed. "I can make you some broth." "No," he said, staring at her lips. "Or perhaps," she went on, "some bread if you think you can manage to eat." "Odette," he interrupted. Her name on his lips made her look back. "Do I make you nervous?" he asked, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "Of course not." She gulped. "I've been tending your wounds for days. I'm perfectly comfortable." His lips curved into a smile that was absolutely devastating. "You're blushing," he observed. "I am not blushing," she protested, but her cheeks were burning and they both knew it. "Has anyone ever told you that you're rather endearing when you're flustered?" he asked slowly. The door burst open as Jadis burst inside, making Odette freeze. She was Ms. Buer's favorite, a mean-spirited maid who loved to tell on others even when they'd done nothing worth being told. "Healer Chiron, the head cook needs—" She stopped dead, her eyes landing on Odette. "You're still here?" She gaped, her pretty face twisted with false shock. Odette shot to her feet, her heart sinking. "Jadis, I can explain," she began. "Madame Buer fired you." Jadis crossed her arms. "Or did you forget you were sent to fetch spices for the head cook, only to return empty-handed with a wounded shifter instead?" "He would have died if I hadn't brought him here," Odette said, pointing to the soldier. "Oh, I'm sure," Jadis replied, her smile sharp. "But trespassing on castle grounds after being dismissed? That's serious, Odette." She turned toward the door. "I should fetch the guards, let them sort this out." "Wait, Jadis, please." Odette started forward, but she was already gone. Silence fell over the cottage. "What just happened?" the soldier asked, his voice hard now, all amusement gone. "You were fired from your job?" Odette turned back to him. "It's nothing, really. The head maid, Madame Buer, she hates everyone. Well, she hates me more than most, but that's just how it is." She shrugged. "I'll find another job. Somewhere. Probably." "You lost your job," he repeated, sitting up further. "Because you helped me?" "It was worth it," Odette said simply. He stared at her like she'd grown a second head. His hand shot out, catching hers before she could step away. "You lost everything for a stranger," he said. "You're not a stranger. You're a soldier who fought for us." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, admiration, something deeper she couldn't name. "At least let me properly thank you," he said, his voice low and earnest. They were so close, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Before she could think, before she could talk herself out of it, she leaned forward and kissed him. She felt him go still with surprise, felt the sharp intake of his breath. Her free hand had somehow found his bare shoulder, and the heat of his skin beneath her palm made her dizzy. This was her first real kiss, her first touch of a man like this, intimate, deliberate, wanted. It lasted only a heartbeat, maybe two. But in that brief moment, everything else disappeared. When she pulled back, her face was burning. "There," she said breathlessly. "Now I've been properly thanked." A slow smile spread across the soldier's face. "I have to go now," she said, smiling back, "but hopefully you're now well enough to come find me soon." And with that, she was already moving toward the door, a wild mix of panic and exhilaration rushing through her. She fled into the morning sunlight, her lips still tingling from her first real kiss. From the kiss she'd given him. She'd made it perhaps 20 paces when a sharp voice stopped her cold. "Still here, I see," Madame Buer said. Odette froze. Madame Buer stood near the main path, Jadis beside her with a satisfied smirk. 2 guards flanked them. "Madame Buer, please, I can explain," Odette started. "Trespassing on castle grounds after dismissal is a serious offense," Buer announced, her voice like ice. "Guards, escort her off the premises immediately." The guards moved forward. One grabbed Odette's arm roughly. "I just needed shelter from the storm," Odette protested. "You were told to leave. You defied a direct order," Buer stated. "Perhaps a night in the cells will teach you about following instructions." "Stop!" a voice commanded. Everyone turned. The soldier stood in the cottage doorway. He'd found ill-fitting clothes and his blonde hair was disheveled, but he stood straight and tall, commanding. "Release her. Now," he ordered, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. The guard holding Odette loosened his grip. "And who are you to give orders?" Buer demanded, though something flickered in her expression. Uncertainty. The soldier stepped forward into the full sunlight. His gray eyes swept over the assembled group with the kind of assessing gaze that came from years of command. One of the guards, an older man with silver in his beard, went completely still. "Merciful gods," he breathed, dropping immediately to his knees before shouting, "Your Majesty!" Madame Buer froze. "Your Majesty, forgive us. We had no idea you had returned," she said, bowing. The other guard dropped to his knees as well, so fast Odette heard his kneecaps crack. "Your Majesty," he said. The soldier she'd rescued, the man she'd tended for 3 days, the wounded shifter she'd talked to, confided in, thanked for his service. The man she'd kissed was the Alpha King Rhovan, ruler of the entire kingdom. Oh gods, she'd kissed the king. Her legs felt like water, her face burned so hot she thought she might faint. "Rise, all of you," Rhovan commanded, though his eyes never left Odette's face. The guards scrambled up. Buer remained in her curtsy, uncertain. "What's happening here?" His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "A misunderstanding, Your Majesty, a simple misunderstanding," Buer started. "This woman was fired for helping me." Rhovan cut her off. "For saving my life when I was wounded and dying in the snow. Is that correct?" Silence. "Answer me," he ordered. "She abandoned her duties, Your Majesty," Buer said quickly. "She saved the Alpha King's life," Rhovan said, his voice soft. "Dangerous. While my own guards apparently couldn't be bothered to help carry their wounded king to safety. Would you like to explain that?" The older guard looked like he wanted to sink through the earth. "I thought not," Rhovan continued. He turned his attention back to Odette. "You," he said. "As of this moment, you're assigned to my personal household. Report to the steward this afternoon." Odette couldn't speak, couldn't move. Buer curtsied so low she nearly toppled. More people were arriving now, servants, officials, drawn by the commotion. Word was spreading like wildfire through the castle. The Alpha King had returned. Chapter 4. 3 weeks had passed since the Alpha King's return. The war was over. The kingdom was safe. But no one's life had changed quite as much as Odette's. She was now part of the king's personal household staff. She saw him constantly. And it was torture. Because every time she looked at him, seated at his desk reviewing documents, standing by the windows discussing strategy, she remembered. Remembered the feel of his bare skin under her hands, the heat of him, the scars she'd traced with her fingers, the softness of his lips when she'd kissed him. Now those same shoulders were hidden beneath fine shirts and embroidered doublets. That same chest was armored in leather and ceremony. That same mouth issued commands to generals and nobles. He was the Alpha King, powerful, untouchable, surrounded always by people who belonged in his world. And she was a maid who'd gotten impossibly lucky and impossibly stupid in equal measure. Sometimes she felt his eyes on her. She'd be pouring wine or straightening cushions, and awareness would prickle down her spine. but she could never hold his gaze. It had been so simple in the healer's cottage, just a wounded soldier and the woman who'd saved him. Now there were titles and protocols and an entire kingdom between them. "You seem nervous, Odette," he'd said once, when she'd nearly dropped the tea tray. "Do I still make you nervous?" He'd looked amused, like her embarrassment was entertaining. The castle might have changed, filled with hope and celebration, but for Odette, every day was a reminder of a moment that should never have happened. "The king can't take his eyes off you," Liv said, folding a sheet with practiced efficiency. "That's not true," Odette said. "He's just being polite." Rosie laughed. "The man watches you like you're water and he's dying of thirst." "You're wrong," Odette said quietly. "He's a king. He can't—" "Odette," a steward said, interrupting the conversation. "The king requests your presence in his private chambers. Immediately." Her friends snickered as she walked away, trying to steady her breath. "This is nothing. He probably needs linens," she told herself. Rhovan stood by the fireplace, the fire haloing his frame. His doublet was gone, leaving only a loose white shirt falling open at the throat. He looked nothing like the distant king she served. He looked like the wounded soldier she had tended, beautiful and dangerously human. "You sent for me, Your Majesty?" she whispered. "I did." He turned to gaze upon her and smiled. "Come here, Odette." Her feet felt rooted, but somehow she moved. "Closer," the king said. She took another step. "The wound on my shoulder," he said, tilting slightly to give her access. "It's been bothering me. I think it may be infected. Will you look?" Her mouth went dry. "Your Majesty, perhaps the royal healer—" "I'm asking you," he said softly. There was no refusing that tone. Her hands shook as she reached for the edge of his shirt, brushing it aside. The brush of fabric revealed smooth skin and hard muscle, the heat of him rolling off in waves that made her flush instantly. The wound was fine, perfectly healed, just a faint redness. But her fingers still traced it delicately, reverently, trying to ignore the way her breath stuttered in her throat. "It looks fine," she whispered. "No infection." "Good," Rhovan murmured. He stood very still, as if inviting her to touch him longer, to linger. "Are you happy here, Odette?" he asked suddenly. "In my household?" The question startled her. "Of course, Your Majesty," she said. "You don't seem it." His voice dropped even lower. "You avoid my gaze. You flee every room I enter." Her heart thrashed in her chest. She could feel the slow rise and fall of him, could see the stark lines of his throat, how his shirt dipped low enough to reveal the sculpted shape of his chest. "I'm only trying to be proper," she whispered. "Proper," he repeated with quiet amusement. He turned slowly, and the shift brought his face inches from hers. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "From where I stand," he murmured, "it feels like you're pretending we're strangers." Her breath hitched. "Your Majesty, It is as though we didn't spend days alone together," he interrupted. "But don't you know it's all I think about?" His hand rose, deliberate and slow, engulfing hers. The simple contact made her knees nearly gave out. "Every time I see you in the corridors," he said. "Every time you curtsy and run away." His hand swallowed hers completely. "I think about you sitting beside me," he confessed. "Talking to me like I was just a man." "You are the king," she tried weakly. "And yet all I see is you," he said, "even when you're not there." Her chest constricted painfully. "You're mocking me," she said, trying to yank her hand back. He didn't let go. Suddenly his body was against hers, his gray eyes locked onto her lips. "I keep thinking about that kiss," he said, voice roughened. "The one you gave me before you ran." Heat swept through her, low and heavy. "Your Majesty, I apologize if she attempted. "You left," he said quietly, "before I could return it." Her breath stuttered. I don't understand," she whispered. "Don't you?" His free hand rose to her jaw, cupping it gently. "Let me make it clearer." Then his mouth crashed into hers with heated purpose, his hand sliding to the back of her neck. Her mind went white with sensation. This kiss wasn't like the soft, frightened kiss she'd given him in the cottage. This was hunger. This was demand. This was a king taking what he wanted and knowing she wanted it too. When she gasped, his tongue swept into her mouth and she clutched at his shirt, desperate to keep breathing, to keep feeling him everywhere. He lifted her slightly, backing her into the wall. Cold stone pressed against her spine, but his heat smothered it instantly. "Odette," he breathed, voice ragged, hands tight on her hips. "I want—" Her breath broke. He wanted her. The king wanted the little servant girl who'd kissed him once and fled, wanted her touch, her surrender. And God's help her, she wanted him back. She had never wanted anything like this, never felt anything like this. But that was the problem. For him, this was fleeting. A king amusing himself with a servant. Gratitude mixed with attraction, nothing more. For her, this was everything. She was already falling, had already felt her heart breaking at the thought of the moment this ending. And if she let this continue, if she gave herself to him completely, she'd want it forever. "No," she gasped, pushing against his chest. "Odette," his voice was rough, confused. "Please," she said, tears burning in her eyes. "Please, Your Majesty, I can't do this." His eyes were dark, pupils blown wide, hair disheveled where her fingers had tangled in it. "Why not?" he asked. "Because I'm falling in love with you," she thought. "Because you're the king," she said instead. She ducked under his arm and ran. She heard him call her name, heard his footsteps behind her, heavy and fast. But she was faster, knew the servants' corridors better. She fled through hidden passages, her lungs burning, her whole body trembling. She turned a corner into a narrow storage corridor and stopped short. Voices coming from the alcove ahead. "Another 20 silver this month," a man's voice said, the usual arrangement. "And no one's noticed the discrepancy?" Madame Buer's cold tones. Odette pressed herself against the wall, trying to catch her breath silently. "The books balance perfectly," the man replied. "I provide the cheap grain and vegetables, you pay for the expensive goods, and we split the difference. The king's household never knows." "Good," Buer said. "With all these returning soldiers to feed, we can increase the skim. Make it 30 silver next month." Odette's blood ran cold. Madame Buer was stealing from the king's household, buying cheap food, keeping the difference. She needed to tell someone. No, first she needed to gather proof. Who knew how many others were involved? Odette slipped away silently, her mind racing. Chapter 5. Over the next few days, Odette watched. She kept her head down, performed her duties, and paid attention to things she'd previously ignored. The packages Jadis carried through back corridors. The way Madame Buer's ledgers never quite seemed to match the actual supplies in the storerooms. Odette began keeping notes, careful to hide them in the lining of her spare dress. And today, 3 days into her research, she found herself in the kitchen garden, checking the herb inventory against Buer's ledger. The numbers didn't match. "You're very intent on those roses," Rhovan's voice said. Odette jumped, nearly dropping the basket of herbs. "Your Majesty?" She dropped into a hasty curtsy. "I didn't hear you approach." "I noticed," he said, amusement in his voice. "You've been avoiding me again." "I've been working," Odette snapped before remembering she was speaking to a king. His eyebrows rose, but he looked more amused than offended. "Walk with me," he said, with a small smile. It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't a request either. They walked in silence for a moment, Odette acutely aware of him beside her. "Odette," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Her heart sank. "Your Majesty, you don't—" "I do," he interrupted. "For the other day, in my chambers, I shouldn't have kissed you like that. It was inappropriate." The words cut deeper than they should have. Of course he regretted it. Of course. "You don't need to apologize, Your Majesty," Odette said, keeping her voice steady. "I understand. I know my place." He stopped walking abruptly, turning to face her. "No," he said, his voice sharp. "I don't think you do." She looked up at him, confused by the intensity in his gray eyes. "You saved my life, Odette," he said. And there was something raw in his voice now, passionate. "After I spent 6 years saving everyone else's." "That's my duty as king. It's what I'm supposed to do, and I don't fault anyone for needing it. But you—" He took a breath. "You saved me, and not because I'm a king, but because you are kind." "Your Majesty—" Odette's throat tightened, warmth blooming in her chest, dangerous and wonderful. "That means something to me," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I regret kissing you because I'm afraid it might have given you the wrong impression regarding my intentions." Oh, she understood now. What she'd done mattered to him, and because of that, because he cared about her feelings, he was trying to spare her from hoping for something he couldn't give. "Don't worry, Your Majesty," Odette said quietly. "You're the king. I'm a servant. I'm not— I know my place. You haven't hurt me or disappointed me. I promise." Something flickered across his face. Frustration, confusion, almost pain. "The winter ball is tonight," he said abruptly, seeming to change direction entirely. "I want you to attend, as my personal guest." Odette frowned. "Sorry, what?" "I'm inviting you to the ball," he said, a small smile playing at his lips. "Your Majesty, that's—" Odette shook her head. "Servants don't attend the winter ball. I mean, it's for nobles and—" "And anyone I invite," the king interrupted gently. "I want you there." His hand came up as if to touch her face. "Please, say yes," he said. He was standing so close, and the afternoon sun caught in his hair, and he was looking at her like her answer actually mattered to him, and it made her heart swell. "Yes," she heard herself whisper. "Good." His smile was brilliant. "I hope you'll see that my intentions are sincere, because I plan to make sure everyone else does." "Your Majesty?" A council member appeared looking for the king. "We had an appointment?" And with that, the king was gone, leaving Odette standing alone in the garden, wondering what she'd just agreed to. "Did you hear," Liv whispered that evening, "about the ball?" Odette looked up from mending her stockings. "The king is going to announce his engagement," Rosie said, "to Lady Seraphine of Northmarch. Everyone's talking about it." The needle slipped, pricking Odette's finger. "A political match," Liv continued. "Well, what did all you expect?" Jadis's voice cut in from the doorway. "A king needs a proper queen." Odette winced. She excused herself and fled to the small room she shared with 3 other maids. It was empty, thank the gods. But a package was waiting on her bed. It was with shaky hands that Odette discovered the most beautiful gown she'd ever seen, ivory white silk and diamonds that shimmered like starlight. A matching mask, a note in strong masculine handwriting. "For tonight. I look forward to seeing you. R." Odette sank onto the bed, the beautiful gown in her lap, and cried. She'd fallen in love with this man who she'd seen at his most vulnerable, who'd defended her and expressed his gratitude for an act everyone had mocked her for, and who'd kissed her not once, but twice. And he was getting engaged to another. She folded the gown back into its box. She wouldn't go. A knock at the door made her freeze. "Open up," a guard's voice commanded. "By order of Madame Buer." Odette opened the door to find two guards flanking Jadis, who wore vindictive satisfaction. Behind them stood Madame Buer, her face arranged in false disappointment. "I'm afraid there's been a serious accusation," Buer said. "Theft from the king's personal chambers." "That's impossible," Odette protested. "Search her room," Buer ordered. The guards tore through her belongings. One reached under her mattress and pulled out a small ornate box containing a gold pocket watch and jewelry. "I've never seen those before in my life," Odette breathed. "Of course you'd say that," Jadis said sweetly. "The penalty is imprisonment and exile to the colonies," Buer announced, eyes gleaming. "No, please, I didn't do this," Odette cried as the guards seized her arms. But no one listened. Liv and Rosie appeared in the doorway, horrified but silent as the guards dragged Odette through corridors, down stone steps, into the cold depths beneath the castle. Chapter 6. The cell was cold and dark, and Odette had lost track of time. Hours? It felt like days. She sat on the narrow bench, arms wrapped around herself, trying not to think about what was happening above. The ball had started. She could hear it, distant music filtering down through stone, the muffled sounds of celebration. Laughter. Joy. The king was up there, announcing his engagement, moving on with his life while she rotted below for a crime she didn't commit. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Odette looked up, expecting guards. Instead, Liv and Rosie appeared at the bars, their faces pale and determined. "We're getting you out," Liv whispered. "What?" Odette shook her head. "No, you can't. If they catch you—" "You're always taking risks for others," Rosie said. "Well, now we're taking one for you." She pulled something from her apron, a set of thin metal picks. "My brother's a locksmith, taught me a few things." "You'll be thrown in here with me," Odette protested. "Then we'd better not get caught." Rosie knelt by the lock, her fingers working with surprising deftness. "This is madness," Odette breathed. But hope flickered in her chest for the first time in hours. The lock clicked. The cell door swung open. "Come on," Liv urged, pulling Odette to her feet. "We need to—" Voices echoed from around the corner. All three women froze, pressing themselves against the wall. Two guards walked past, their conversation drifting back. "Extra security at the ball tonight. Madame Buer mentioned concerns about a poison attempt." "Really? From who?" "That maid they arrested. Supposedly she was planning to poison the king during the engagement announcement. Good thing Buer caught her before—" The voices faded as they turned another corner. Odette's blood ran cold. "What are they talking about?" Liv whispered. "Poisoning the king?" "Buer's going to poison him," Odette breathed, eyes wide with horror. "And frame me for it." "You?" Rosie asked. "But you're locked up in here." "All the better," Odette said. "She's already convinced the guards it was my intention to hurt His Majesty. If the king is poisoned tonight, I'll be the perfect scapegoat. She'll act as though I had an accomplice." "But why would she take such a risk just to frame you?" Liv asked. "Because I discovered what she's been doing," Odette said quickly, the pieces falling into place. "She's been stealing from the king's household for months, buying cheap supplies and pocketing the difference. I've been keeping notes, gathering evidence. She must have found out I was on to her." "To the point of poisoning our king?" Rosie exclaimed, horrified. "She's desperate, cornered," Odette said. "We have to warn His Majesty, now." They fled through the servants' passages, taking stairs two at a time. Odette's heart hammered. If Madame Buer succeeded, the king would die, and Odette would hang for his murder. They burst into the servants' quarters. Odette rushed to her room, looking for the gown. Gone. The beautiful ivory gown, the mask, everything. "How am I going to get into the ball?" Odette exclaimed. Here, Liv said, thrusting a simple servant's dress at her. It's clean at least. And this, she pressed a plain cloth mask into Odette's hands. It's not fancy, but it'll get you in. Odette changed quickly, her fingers trembling. The dress was brown, homespun, nothing like the shimmering gown the king had sent. The mask was simple, unadorned. Go, Rosie urged. Hurry. Odette ran. The ballroom was magnificent, all golden light and glittering chandeliers, the cream of Runeveld's nobility dressed in silks and jewels. Music swelled from the orchestra. Couples danced across the polished floor in a kaleidoscope of color. Odette had never felt more out of place. She slipped through the main doors, keeping to the edges of the crowd. Servants moved between guests with trays of wine and delicacies. No one looked twice at her in her plain dress and mask. She searched desperately for Rhovan. She had to warn him. She could clear her name later, could explain everything later. Right now, all that mattered was keeping him alive. Please, she thought, please let me reach him in time. There, on the dais at the far end of the hall. Her breath caught. He stood beside his throne, magnificent in black and silver, a crown on his blonde hair. He looked every inch the king he was, powerful, commanding, untouchable. But there was something in his expression, a tightness around his eyes, a sadness that made her chest ache. He was scanning the crowd, she realized, looking for someone. Looking for her, maybe. For the woman in the ivory gown he'd sent. Guilt and longing twisted in her stomach. Then movement at the grand entrance made the entire ballroom turn. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. She was stunning, radiant. The ivory silk gown caught the light from 1,000 candles, diamonds glittering like captured stars. She descended the stairs slowly, gracefully, and every eye in the ballroom followed her. "Who is that?" someone whispered. "Magnificent," another voice murmured. Even the orchestra seemed to swell, as if the universe itself was celebrating her arrival. Odette's heart stopped. Jadis. That was her gown. The gown the king had sent for her. The gown that was supposed to transform her into someone who belonged in this glittering world, even if just for one night. And Jadis wore it like she'd been born to it. Like this was her fairy tale moment. Like she was Odette, coming to answer the king's invitation. Horror washed over Odette. Jadis wasn't just stealing her gown, she was stealing her identity. Buer's plan was perfect: poison the king while she was dressed as Odette, and have every witness swear they saw her do it. The crowd parted for her, nobles bowing slightly as she passed. She moved through them like a queen, radiant and confident, every inch the noblewoman she was pretending to be. On the dais, the king turned toward the vision in ivory descending toward him. His face transformed. The careful control, the royal composure, it all fell away. His expression opened like sunrise, raw and unguarded. Relief flooded his features, followed by something so tender it made Odette's chest ache. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. He looked like a man who'd been holding his breath and could finally breathe again. All because he was looking at Jadis, who he thought was her. Had he ever looked at her like that? When Odette had been too nervous to meet his eyes, too convinced he was just being kind, had this been there all along? This desperate, relieved happiness? "Is that the king's fiancé?" a noblewoman whispered nearby, breaking through Odette's spiraling thoughts. "In the white gown?" "Must be," her companion replied. "Look how pleased he is to see her. I've never seen him smile like that." Fiancé. Right, the engagement announcement. This was all for... But the way he was looking at Jadis, at the woman he thought was Odette. That wasn't how you looked at someone you were grateful to. That wasn't kindness or duty. That was... Jadis reached the dais, climbing the steps with practiced grace. She curtsied low, and Odette saw it then, the goblet in her hands. Dark red wine that caught the light wrong. Jadis extended the goblet toward the king in silence, her head bowed demurely, the picture of modest elegance. The king reached for it without hesitation, still smiling, still looking at the woman in ivory like she was the only person in the room. The goblet, the poison. Odette's paralysis shattered. "No!" she screamed. She broke through the final row of courtiers and threw herself forward. The crowd gasped. Guards moved, but she was faster. Odette reached the dais just as Rhovan's fingers touched the goblet. She knocked it from Jadis's hands with her own empty cup. The poisoned wine spilled across the white marble steps. Where it hit, the stone hissed and blackened. The roses in a nearby vase withered instantly, their petals turning brown and crumbling to dust. The ballroom fell silent. Everyone stared at the corroded stone, at the dead flowers, at the clear evidence of poison. Then at Jadis, frozen in shock, still wearing Odette's gown. And at Odette, in her plain brown dress and simple mask, breathing hard, her hand still extended from knocking away death. Rhovan's eyes locked on hers. Recognition flooded his face. "Odette," he breathed. Chapter 7. The ballroom was frozen in shocked silence. 1,000 eyes stared at the corroded marble, at the dead roses, at the clear evidence of poison. But Odette saw only him. Rhovan's gray eyes locked on hers, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. Recognition, relief, and something fiercer flooded his face. He moved before she could breathe, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands came up to cup her face, tilting it toward his, and the look in his eyes made her heart stutter. "You came," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "You're here, you're safe." Odette smiled despite everything, despite the chaos, the danger, the 100 watching nobles. "I came," she whispered. But then his brow furrowed, confusion clouding his joy. His thumb stroked her cheekbone as if assuring himself she was real. "But I don't understand. Who was that? Why were you—" A shriek cut through the air. Jadis bolted, trying to flee down the dais steps. Guards seized her immediately, their hands clamping on her arms. "Let me go," she struggled. "I didn't do anything. She made me—" "Explain," Rhovan commanded, his hand still framing Odette's face. "Quickly." "Earlier today I was framed for theft and imprisoned," Odette explained. "Madame Buer planted evidence in my room because I discovered she's been stealing from your household for months, buying cheap supplies and keeping the difference. My friends broke me out when we overheard guards talking about a poison attempt. Jadis wore the gown you sent me to pose as me, to poison you, so everyone would think I did it. Buer orchestrated everything." Rhovan's jaw tightened, his eyes going cold and dangerous. "Guards, bring Madame Buer forward, now." The crowd parted. 2 guards dragged Buer through, her face pale but arranged in false innocence. "Your Majesty, this is clearly a misunderstanding," Buer started. "Search Jadis," Rhovan ordered, cutting her off. "Thoroughly." One of the guards reached into Jadis's bodice. She shrieked in protest, but he pulled out a small glass vial, still half full of dark liquid. "Nightshade," the guard announced, unstoppering it carefully. "Concentrated." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. "That's not mine. Madame Buer gave it to me. She said it was perfume." Jadis sobbed. "Lies," Buer spat. "Your Majesty, this girl has clearly been corrupted by that criminal—" She pointed at Odette with venom. "I have evidence," Odette said, despite her racing heart. "Notes, dates, records of discrepancies between your ledgers and the actual supplies." "Convenient that you'd claim this now," Buer sneered. "She's telling the truth," Liv's voice rang out from the crowd. Other servants stepped forward, emboldened. An older cook, a stable hand, a supply clerk. Madame Buer ordered me to falsify inventory records, the clerk said nervously, said she'd dismiss me if I didn't. She threatened my position if I mentioned the quality of the grain, the cook added. She's been stealing for at least a year, another voice called. Buer's face twisted with rage. You dare? You insignificant? Enough! Rhovan's voice cut through the hall like a blade. His hands dropped from Odette's face as he turned to his guards. Arrest them both. Madame Buer and Jadis will stand trial for attempted murder, conspiracy, theft, and treason. I want a full investigation. No, Buer shrieked as guards seized her arms. You'd take the word of a common maid over mine? I'd take the word of the woman who saved my life, Rhovan said coldly. Twice. Over a thief and a would-be murderer. Remove them from my sight. The guards dragged both women away, their protests echoing through the ballroom. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Rhovan turned back to Odette. His expression softened, the cold fury melting into something warm and wondering. Odette, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. You saved my life again. You risked everything to warn me, even after being falsely imprisoned and stripped of everything. You're innocent of all charges, and I declare it publicly before all witnesses. Relief flooded through her. Thank you, Your Majesty, she said with a bow. No, thank you, he said softly. Then, to her complete shock, he sank to one knee before her. The entire ballroom gasped. What are you doing? Odette breathed, trying to tug him up. Get up! You're the king, you can't— I can very much kneel before my queen, he said, his gray eyes locked on hers. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her shiver. Your queen? She asked, confused. If you'll accept, he said, become my queen, my wife. The ballroom seemed to tilt. Odette stared at him, unable to process the words. I don't— but the engagement announcement. Lady Seraphine? A simple rumor, Rhovan said firmly. There never was any engagement, Odette. She shakes her head, confused. But why then did— Let me be clear, the king said, rising to his feet, but keeping her hands clasped in his. Odette, you saved my life. You healed me and cared for me when I was at my most vulnerable. You treated me like a man, not a king. You exposed corruption in my castle at great personal risk. You escaped prison to save me from assassination. His voice grew more intense. You're clever and kind and brave and selfless. You're everything a queen should be. Everything I could ever hope for. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Your Majesty— Also, he interrupted, his voice dropping lower, more intimate, I'm in love with you, in case that wasn't clear. A sob escaped her, happy, disbelieving, overwhelmed. His hands came up to cup her face again, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. If you need time to think about it, you can— Odette kissed him. She pushed up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, pouring every ounce of feeling she'd been suppressing into it. His arms wrapped around her waist immediately, pulling her close, kissing her back with a fierce tenderness that made her head spin. The ballroom erupted in applause and cheers. Rhovan smiled against her lips, pulling back just enough to murmur, Is that a yes? Yes, Odette breathed, laughing through her tears. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and the crowd cheered louder. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rhovan turned to address the ballroom, keeping one arm firmly around Odette's waist. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice ringing with joy, may I present your future queen. The applause was deafening. Nobles bowed, servants cheered. And Odette, the maid who'd saved a wolf in a snowstorm, stood beside her king and realized that sometimes fairy tales did come true. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. As we head into the holidays, I have something special planned. This month on Patreon, instead of one exclusive story, I'll be releasing a bundle of 5 to 7 short Christmas stories, featuring some of your favorite characters from previous stories, caught up in cozy, romantic, heartwarming little holiday adventures. And if you'd like a little holiday magic yourself, leave a comment below with your favorite quote from this episode. I'll pick one winner to receive a free month of access to my entire exclusive content library on Patreon.